Hello, this is FC Popcorn, a film companion original podcast. I am here today with Rohini, with Deepanjana, and I'm Prathyush, the token male presence, and we are talking about women in Hindi cinema.
Working.
The power dressing is for the working.
एकदम आप बासु चैटर्जी की हीरोइन लग रही है
मतलब इतना crushed साड़ी शायद वो नहीं पहनती थी but फिर भी
Also, there's some color. There would have been more color. I don't
and
think...
a bouffant, long hair.
Yeah.
but the eyeliner is on
The
point.
eyeliner I
Eyeliner's
have
on point,
tried.
yeah.
I have tried.
देख रही हूँ मैं बहुत ही बढ़िया.
Power dressing should be, I feel like, the different kinds of power dressing that we've seen in Hindi cinema. I'm in love with all of them, but the Basu Chatterjee era really has my heart.
Because it's not trying. It's not trying. It's
Exactly.
not trying to make a point. And like we were discussing that all of these women are working. You don't know exactly what they're doing. It doesn't matter. They are going about their lives.
It's giving dignity to also a whole section of the secretaries, typists,
Oh, yes.
stenographers, telephone operators who were invisible presences in offices, who were often exploited presences in offices.
Right.
And these are films that gave them dignity, that said, hello. In everyday life, there is beauty that she brings by taking a drudgery of a job and saying, I will still put the flowers in my hair,
Yes. Oh.
And that when I am standing being jostled by the crowd, I am still beautiful.
I'm still beautiful, my God, yes. But you know what I feel is that the trajectory of the working woman in Indian cinema could or should have been the trajectory of working women in India. Okay?
That's so true.
And until the 70s, it kind of was. Okay. At some point in the 90s, we'll come to it, we'll talk about it. But that era to signify or just like show us the working woman, the 70s were the greatest.
It's so true because, the thing is that from the 90s, somehow, the whole idea of the housewife, the good girl who stays within the domestic, within the Lakshman Rekha of the home becomes really sort of sexy, essentially, right? But if you think about it, the further back you go in Bollywood history, in Hindi cinema history, working women have been the sexy ones. Like if you look at the old vintage pre-independence era, the start of the Hindi film industry, the commercial Hindi had been
Hindi film
जब
industry.
Indians पे गोली चलाओ सब बोल रहे थे. All right then. So at the start of the Hindi film industry, the people, a very significant chunk of it and very sort of influential in its development were the courtesans. The first of the working women, aside from obviously like, agricultural labor that, basically domestic labor, agricultural labor, women's roles have always been ignored in that.
No, but also because the movies moved from the villages to the cities.
Yeah.
And in the cities, the only space where women would be working is if they didn't have money.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
they didn't have money, it meant they didn't have family. And then it meant that they needed to engage themselves in professions because हमारे घर की औरतें काम नहीं करती.
And so it's really interesting because courtesans also were in their original form, or rather in their modern form, they were a completely alternative way of life, right? They were the epitome of modernity in the sense they were women who had their own houses, they drove their cars and they gave the heroes a lift, They had independent agency, they had cash. So, and you saw that in the roles that they did. So they are the ones who occupy a space of confidence and the men admire them, It's not so by the time we see something like Umrao Jan, which is sort of,
The sanitized version of it.
yeah, but there is a certain, and that I think Rekha saves that film completely because there is a sense of like,
We're talking about the Rekha version, sorry.
child,
Oh my God! Throw him out!
oh my God.
I never thought there'll be a day.
No,
I
I
never
knew
thought
there'd be
that'd
a
be-
day,
Oh, you knew.
but I didn't know it would be the writer on my team. He's not this stupid most of the time.
Not at all, actually.
It's the Love Ranjan films, yes.
That's going to be a good piece. You should read it.
Yes!
No, but like this whole idea that the the courtesan is someone who needs to be saved by a man
Right.
is something that comes up with Pakiza onwards, right?
Later, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But the original idea is a much more powerful one because the courtesans were the producers, the directors, the early movers and shakers of Hindi cinema.
Absolutely.
But then, then it gets conflated with sex work, and then we get obsessed with virginity and blah, 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 blah. So then it kind of goes to hell. But that idea of the confident modern woman, it's also related to the fact that the courtesan culture meant a very different family structure. Matrilineal, matriarchal societies where daughters continue a legacy, and the men are very much support staff.
Correct.
So when they sort of get brought into society through marriage mostly, that world changes. The idea, and that becomes a modernity that we're very ambivalent with.
And that structure actually collapses because when you just said that it's a matrilineal society and then, but one second, are you talking about real life or real life? Because,
Because they do
Yeah.
sort of,
Conflate, yeah.
when you sort of see these films, they are never direct reflections of reality, but they are certainly responding to what is happening in the real world, to the real people. So I think one of the reasons why the depiction of working women, courtesans, and the idea of modernity was just much more attractively put forward in the 40s and 50s and 60s even, is that the men who were writing and making these films alongside the women knew women who had been courtesans.
yes, absolutely.
They were very much part of their everyday world. They were friends, they were colleagues. So if you know a person, it's very hard to then turn around and say, you're a cow. Don't look at me like that. We know you can do that. This is a very difficult workspace right now. But, it becomes harder to do that because
Right.
you know that this person comes with incredible gifts.
It's amazing. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
problems perhaps, but also incredible gifts. By the time there's a distance from the idea of a courtesan, it's only in your head. And you are only surrounded by wives of producers or sisters of directors, or, whatever. Like you're seeing people as linked to a man and therefore being allowed into the industry.
Of course. But the courtesan, I think, crystallized into just one woman in the entire industry, and that's Helen. Because then Helen happened, and Helen was technically the only working woman in most of these films, all right, in the films that she was part of.
Right.
There's an East Indian woman who comes to India from Burma. There's a huge history there. And then she starts making a living. She starts dancing because that's her talent. And because Indian girls, like not Anglo-Indian girls ever, Indian women would never dance, and would certainly not dance in front of other people and make a living. Then you see Aruna Irani, then you see Kalpana Iyer, then you see all of these women in the same films alongside, the virtuous girl.
Yeah.
And the virtuous girl has no job. The virtuous girl has absolutely, I don't even know why
Virtue
men...
is a job.
Virtue
It's a 9 to 5. I think.
100%. 100%.
Virtue is a job. Yes, of course.
Like by the 90s, particularly 80s onwards, actually, if you see like in the 80s, 70s particularly, I find really interesting because the films, not all of them obviously, I'm talking about the really popular ones of that decade, they're really conflicted about the idea of a working woman. So you have Abhiman, where,
She gets punished.
Yeah. Because he can't handle it, right? You have Andhi.
But it's framed in a way that is very much against the man. Like
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. But then that's because we read
But
into
neither
it that
is
way,
it
right?
entirely for the woman. Like you're supposed to look
It's
at the
about
amount
the
of
guy
screen
who's
time.
jealous, right?
He's jealous,
Yeah.
but look at the amount of screen time given
To him, that's fair, right.
to make sure that you understand why he's jealous. That it is petty, but also just think,
Yeah.
what are these people saying? What is he having to hear, bichara?
Yeah, Andhi, and I'm so glad he said Andhi because that I slipped by in my list. But wow, man, and also again going back to were the films reflecting what was really happening in India at the time?
These two certainly were.
Certainly were, absolutely.
Right? Like they had such intense real life parallels. Like, I can't remember the specifics of it, but I know there was so much anxiety about, is Suchitra Sen going to be Indira Gandhi? And I was just thinking, have you heard Suchitra Sen talk? And have you heard Indira Gandhi talk? I mean, I don't want to shade anybody, but the thing is that there were very clear parallels that were being drawn from the challenges that Indira Gandhi faced, and that was being romanticized, fictionalized. And so the 70s is filled with films in which the woman has a job. Huh? She
has a job,
like
of
Basanti.
Guys, this is my moment. Like, I'm telling you, Basanti in Kutto ke samne mat nachna was literally the only instruction that she took from a man in that entire film. Okay? Everything else in
Only
that film.
to ignore it and
Only
then
to ignore it
dance.
and then she danced anyway, right? She's like, मैं तो नाचूंगी.